Welcome to the deep dive. So you sent us some really powerful material this time.
Yeah, really get you thinking.
It does. It's all about that tricky line between compassion and maybe, well, what some might call blind forgiveness, especially thinking about families of victims who are just trying to find some peace. And it's not just about, moving on. It's digging into what real peace looks like versus, say, just wanting retribution.
Absolutely. And the sources you share, they map out quite a spectrum, don't they?
They really do.
You see discussions about immediate feelings versus maybe deeper long-term healing.
Right.
Then there's the idea that, well, maybe peace comes more from justice than pure vengeance.
Okay.
And also how that desire for revenge can maybe surprisingly affect the families themselves. Plus, things like restorative justice is another option, and looking at preventing future harm as like the ultimate way to find peace. It's a lot to unpack.
It really is. And that's what we want to do here, really get into it. The core question feels like, how can families find peace, that deep need for peace, while also considering, compassion and justice?
And where does forgiveness, maybe that unconditional kind, fit in? Or does it?
Exactly. So, okay, let's start there. This tension you mentioned, immediate emotional relief versus, like, actual healing.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, why that first instinct for retribution can feel so strong. The sources really highlight that, getting back at someone might feel good for a second.
That quick release, maybe? Or...
Right, that fleeting satisfaction. But it often doesn't really heal the underlying pain, the trauma.
Makes sense.
We saw that example in the materials about, say, the death penalty. For some, maybe it feels like closure initially, but it doesn't reach a person back. It doesn't undo what happened.
No, it can't. It's like putting a bandage on a deep wound, perhaps.
Kind of. You get that momentary sense of, okay, something happened, but the real work, the healing journey, that's still there.
And the sources seem to say that finding real peace, that takes something more sustained.
Definitely. More multifaceted. Things like, having support.
People around you.
Exactly.
Yep.
And maybe understanding the bigger picture, the systemic things. And crucially, feeling like the justice system actually worked properly. That seems way more important long term.
So it's about reaching a point where you genuinely feel, that justice, whatever that looks like, has been served in a meaningful way.
Yeah. Which, brings us right to that key difference. Vengeance versus justice.
Okay, let's talk about that. They're not the same thing at all, are they?
Not according to these sources, no. Vengeance is painted more like, payback. Mirroring the harm done.
An eye for an eye.
Pretty much. Whereas justice is presented as broader. It includes fairness, yes, but also focuses on healing the harm.
Okay.
And really importantly, trying to stop it from happening again. Prevention.
So finding peace of mind.
Yeah.
It isn't always about making the person who caused the harm suffer in the exact same way.
Doesn't seem like it. It might actually come from believing the system handled it right. With integrity.
Like a proper investigation, a fair trial.
And a sentence that feels proportionate to the actual harm caused. Those things, the sources suggest, might bring a deeper, more lasting peace than just raw emotion leading to maybe a disproportionate reaction.
That makes sense. But it also raises this other point you touched on, how wanting vengeance can actually affect the family.
Yeah, this was quite striking in the material. It sort of suggests that focusing hard on getting even, it might actually make things heavier for the family.
Heavier? How so? Like it keeps them stuck.
That's the idea proposed. That holding on to that anger, constantly thinking about retribution, it can kind of trap families in resentment and grief, makes it harder to process everything, to eventually, find a way forward.
So almost like you stay connected to the person who hurt you through that anger.
That's one interpretation, yeah. And it stops the healing, which is where some of these other ideas like restorative justice come into the picture.
Okay, restorative justice. Tell us a bit more about how the sources frame that.
Well, the core idea seems to be shifting the focus. It's less about just punishment and more about accountability and healing. Often it involves the person who did the harm acknowledging what they did, the impact.
Taking responsibility.
Yes, and genuinely trying to make amends in some way, as much as that's even possible, of course.
Now, the material was careful to say this isn't like a magic bullet.
Oh, absolutely. It clearly states, especially in really extreme cases, horrific violence, it might just not be appropriate or even feasible.
Understood.
But in other situations, the sources suggest it can be significant. giving families a chance maybe for dialogue or to see the person take real responsibility.
That could lead to healing.
You could. Finding some peace, perhaps, by seeing genuine remorse, or even just feeling that the accountability contributes something positive, something healing for society, rather than just more pain.
Not just perpetuating a cycle.
Exactly. And that connects to the bigger picture idea, too, the long-term peace through prevention.
Right, stopping it from happening again. How does that fit into a family's sense of peace?
Well, the sources suggest it's actually a really critical element. Thinking about how we stop similar tragedies down the road.
So a justice system that's not just about locking people up.
Yeah, one that also looks at rehabilitation, tries to understand why crimes happen.
The root causes.
Like mental health issues or social inequality. Addressing that systemic stuff, that can offer families a different kind of peace, maybe.
How so?
It's this idea that, okay, their loss was terrible, devastating, but maybe it could spark some real change.
So their loved one's death isn't just an ending.
Right, maybe it's the start of something better, something that protects other people. Finding that kind of meaning, even in tragedy, can be incredibly powerful for healing in the long run.
Wow. Okay, so putting all these pieces together, it's clear that finding peace after something awful happens. It's way more complicated than just punish or forgive.
So much more complicated. And what peace even means is going to be different for every family.
Yeah.
It's deeply personal.
Of course.
And the sources are very clear. Justice absolutely has to acknowledge the victim's family's suffering. That's non-negotiable. But yeah, getting to real, lasting peace seems to involve looking forward to. Healing for the family, yes, but also for society. Trying to break those cycles of violence and revenge.
So when we step back, it feels like we've moved past that simple choice, forgiveness or revenge.
Definitely.
We're in a much more nuanced space, thinking about how compassion and justice can actually work together, even in these incredibly tough situations.
Yeah, that's the core insight, I think. Finding peace is, well, it's a process.
Yeah.
With lots of dimensions.
Like emotional healing?
What justice really means beyond just payback.
How wanting revenge might get in the way.
Exactly. And that big goal, making things safer for everyone in the future.
So a final thought then, for you listening. We've talked a lot about major crimes here, but maybe think about this. How do these ideas about justice, healing, retribution, how might they play out in, say, conflicts in your own life? Or even bigger societal disagreements?
Interesting. What does peace really mean in those contexts?
Right. And how can we aim for solutions that actually heal, that foster understanding, instead of just, a quick fix or getting even, something I'm all over?